Let's step away from function overloads now and let me introduce one other very neat feature. And that is optional chaining. Let's say you have an application where you're getting data from a backend and they are from a database or from any source where you don't know with certainty if in an object a certain property is defined. Let's say we have fetched user data, and fetched user data could be an object about a user we fetched. There we might have an ID, we might have a name, Max, and we also might expect another property, job, which is an object which has a title and which then also has a description, my own company. Now, if we get data like this, of course, we can work with it. Now, you might do more complex things, but here for a start, let's say all I'm doing is I'm actually outputting the job title here, right? Now, if we save that with our development server up and running and compilation running in watch mode, I get CEO here. Now, thus far, that's not too fancy. However, if we are fetching this from a backend, for whatever reason, maybe we don't fetch all the data we need. Maybe some data is not set at this point. In bigger, more complex applications, you certainly sometimes work with structured, with nested data where you don't know with certainty if some property on an object is set or if it's maybe undefined. So here, let's say job does not exist here. For whatever reason, we're not fetching it. Here, of course, I get an error now. TypeScript complains about this because it knows that there is no job property now. The problem is it knows for this data, it wouldn't know if that were data we're fetching from some file that's not controlled from TypeScript. Or, as I just said, if we're maybe fetching this from the backend and we don't know with certainty which data will be returned. Now, if we wouldn't know whether that's defined or not, what we can do in regular JavaScript is we can try to access job, and if that works, we continue and we access title. This is the JavaScript way of checking whether something exists before we then dive deeper into that potential object. And if that is undefined, this code never runs, and hence we avoid a runtime error. Again, here TypeScript of course knows that job does not exist, but if this would be fetched from some source where TypeScript can't look into, like the result of a HTTP request, this would be the secure way of avoiding runtime errors in JavaScript. Now, if this does exist, we get the same output as before. If it does not exist, we don't get a runtime error at least. With TypeScript, you actually got a nicer way of doing that. You got the optional chaining operator. You can add a question mark after the thing you're not sure whether it's defined or not, at least if you're using TypeScript version 3.7 or higher. Here my IDE doesn't like this, but this is a supported syntax then. This tells TypeScript, does this exist? If it does, access job. And hence here we can also add a question mark and therefore only access title if job is defined. Now, if we do that, I still get an error here if I try to compile that, because TypeScript still knows with certainty that job does not exist. But if it wouldn't know that, or if I comment this in, this compiles just fine and also executes as before. So this optional chaining operator here helps us safely access nested properties and nested objects in our object data. And if the thing in front of the question mark is undefined, it will not access the thing thereafter and therefore will not throw a runtime error, but instead it will just not continue. So behind the scenes, this is basically compiled to a if check, which checks whether that exists before it tries to access this.